Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss a huge report into post-election analysis of how voters approach the general election. Important lessons for everyone, but in order to avoid going too data heavy in this post-election period, I'll focus on those for the two big parties of Labour and the Conservatives. But first, it's worth pointing out a couple of key things which will be important to all parties making sense of this report and the others which will come out over the next few months and the ones they will commission themselves. The first is that the researchers found a lot of people have lost faith in politics to deliver for them. This does not come as any surprise, but it's always good to quantify it properly. There's a firm belief now that voters think the system is rigged for the rich against everyone else. This study found that 74% of the public believe this to be the case. So although there were various reasons for the more even distribution of votes across multiple parties than we've ever seen in British history, including tactical voting, this will be a big part of that. It will also have been a big part of the low turnout as well. A combination of a belief that something better was definitely replacing the Tories, but not necessarily good enough to go out and vote for it. So the first lesson is for Labour, of course. They must change that mindset. They must deliver. But as they are open about saying this themselves, it's reasonable to suppose they are already fully appraised of this lesson. Indeed, their strategy of under-promising and over-delivering could help them here, as long as they do over-deliver, of course. Second thing to be aware of, and this isn't connected direct to the study, but just to be aware of whenever considering public opinion on anything, there's sort of like two axes to consider: views and saliency. Most people focus too much on the views, not at all the saliency. Views are what the public on a particular group of voters think should be done on a particular issue. Saliency is how strongly they feel about it. For example, if a majority of the public think that Downing Street should be renamed Downing McDownface Street, but hardly anyone would change their vote over the issue, politicians can safely ignore such an idea. Whereas if a small minority of the public, but one which represents key swing voters and important marginal constituencies, believe that Marmite peanut butter is the best thing ever, and they are prepared to use their vote to defend it, then the government had best be prepared to save the factory should it ever be threatened with closure. A lot of people wave opinion polls around without ever asking if the people in favour or against something represent either the key voters or how strongly they feel about it. So in a nutshell, what were the key lessons for Labour and the Conservatives that you can actually take away from this? Well, let's do the Conservatives first, because they are the ones least likely to learn these lessons, which should be entertaining for a while. The first is further evidence that they're not able to combine their vote with Reform UK. The study explains that, of course, they need to win Reform UK voters back. 3 in every 4 Reform voters voted for the Conservatives in 2019. Of course, they have to win them back, with the Conservatives suffering by far and away the greatest number of votes lost to death compared to the other parties then. Job 1, winning those votes back. But the research found that even if the Tories had merged with Reform for the election, it would have netted them only an extra 500,000 votes across the country. And that is because, as I keep saying, there are Reform voters who won't vote Tory and Tory voters who won't vote Reform. Merging the parties draws in those who are fine with every party, the crossover in the Venn diagram, but it repels all the rest. It expels those who don't like one or the other intensely enough to change their vote. And according to this study, that would amount to a lot of votes. And even when you say 500,000 votes gained, you'd need to consider where they are. Any of those votes in areas that wouldn't have changed the result anyway are wasted. That includes seats the Tories had no chance in, as well as those they ended up winning regardless. It would be interesting to find out how many votes would be in seats they didn't win but could have done with a bit more support. It won't have been many. The study calculates it would have given the Tories an extra 40 seats. Now, that is enough to make it a 1997 style of defeat, but still a historically bad result. Another lesson for the Tories goes directly against the grain of what the Muppets vying for leadership are talking about. The study showed really clearly that the Conservatives lost the election because they were considered incompetent. It wasn't about where they were on the political spectrum. As far as the voters were concerned, it wasn't because they were too left-wing or too right-wing. It was being useless. Among Conservative voters, these are now the 2024 Conservative voters, 8% thought they were too left-wing. 10% thought they were too right-wing. 48% thought they were just incompetent. And those are the people who still voted Conservative. Amongst those who voted for other parties, some of whom will have voted Conservative in the past, the figure was way higher. Basically, the Conservatives' problem was one of delivery, not ideology. It's never ideology for most voters. They don't care what method you use to make something work within reason, as long as you make it work. The Conservatives didn't. And those same voters will make the same judgment call of Labour. So what are the lessons for Labour to learn? Well, to avoid teaching grandma to suck eggs, let's dispense with the lessons, which I think it's very likely Labour are already aware of. One important finding, which will presumably be new to Labour, is how long they will have. In other words, how long is their honeymoon period likely to be? Well, the good news is that 72% expect things to improve over the next few years. So they're going, okay, that's like they're giving it a few years. Labour are certainly trying to extend their honeymoon period by loudly and consistently drawing attention to the damage the Tories have done and revealing new hidden damage that they were hiding. I'll give you an example of something that will definitely form part of the narrative in this Parliament in the next few years. Starmer and Reeves have already talked about the fact the Tories were filling their pockets instead of getting PPE to frontline health and social care workers. Well, it is also Labour's policy to claw back as much money as they can from COVID fraud. So when they start to do that, they will be again reminding people that this is fraud that the Tories not only enabled, but failed to chase down, even when they acknowledged it was fraud. When they start recovering the money, because that will take longer still, they'll say it again. And because they'll be recovering more and more money each year, every year they'll have an opportunity to keep reminding the public of what the Tories did. Labour can keep pushing this message like a drumbeat throughout this entire Parliament. And that is just one example of how they can keep reminding people that although Labour are fixing the problems, it's the Tories who caused them. It means that come the next election, when not everything will be fixed, they're not going to fix everything in 4 or 5 years, but they can say, who do you want to elect? The people who have fixed some things and are carrying on fixing the rest, or the people who wrecked it in the first place? But that strategy relies on people being satisfied that Labour are fixing things. No good if it's such a high percentage of the public still believing Labour are fundamentally not on their side, even if they're not as bad as the Tories. People came out and voted to get rid of the Tories. The study shows a quarter of Labour's votes came from first-time voters. They need to show the majority that they can have faith in established politics if they are to beat populism. So deliver over the next few years and Labour should be good, right? Well, they may need to deliver a little bit more quickly than that. The study showed that Labour voters were actually the most impatient for change. Whereas many other voters will give Labour 2 or 3 years, Labour voters are giving them a year. Now, sure, you could argue that as long as they see the benefits by the next election, does it really matter how quickly? It can do. You don't want people becoming disillusioned with Labour. Many already voted for them out of desperation. Don't let them think that they're not doing the business, because then it's harder to win them back. If you start to lose them, it's quite hard to get them back, even if you do start delivering. And what do they need to deliver? Well, the top form of delivery by some distance is NHS waiting lists. So good news, bad news. The good news is that NHS waiting lists is a very easy metric to publish and be reported on. Really no need for nuance with that one, even though it is possible to be nuanced about it. The other good news is that Labour are fully seized of this because they've made it one of their first 6 steps. So they already knew what their target voters wanted. Other top expectations were political scandals in the news. I'm assuming people expect to see fewer of them. That should hopefully be safe. And when they do happen, and there's always scandals in any party, dealing with them quickly will help as well. UK's net carbon emissions was 3rd priority. Now, trickier because the changes will be slower there, but if they see the work taking place to meet those aims, that will hopefully be good enough. Inflation was 4th. I mean, that's a little tricky because it's already at target. Do they mean to stay at target, stay where it is now? You know, maybe the news on reporting that there aren't inflation problems will mean Labour get this win as well. And then it was like a sliding scale of things like use of food banks, cost of energy bills, number of small boat crossings, and the cost of the weekly shop. Now, that last one is very personal to voters and will have to be judged in terms of incomes going up because the costs aren't coming down. But the rest are all going to be easy metrics to report on. Out of the list, by far the trickiest, actually, ironically, will be the NHS waiting lists, because what do those voters want to see? Do they want to see them coming down year on year to the point where you can see a trajectory where they get down under control in time? Because they can absolutely do that. Will they be low enough to meet expectations is the key. That is the question. But those are the main lessons for both Tories and the Labour, I would say. It was a very large report, very comprehensive. It will be of use to any political party who wants to work on a sensible strategy for the next election. Put it this way, I think there will be more people in Labour reading it than the Conservatives, but you never know. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe for further content and click the like button. You can also sign up for memberships if you'd like to support the channel further. Thanks for watching. Until next time, I'll see you later.